"She's not like the last one," he said. "She understands the lifestyle." That was what Seren Brielle heard as she reached for a glass of sparkling water on the far side of the ballroom. She hadn't even been there 20 minutes. Kyle's voice hadn't changed. Still deep. Still slow in a way that made people stop and lean in, even when he said nothing of value. Vieira giggled. Seren didn't need to turn to know the sound belonged to her, the new wife, the one with the diamond-studded last name. Welcome back to Mr. Charles Stories, where silence isn't weakness, it's a strategy. If you've ever been mocked by someone who once claimed to love you, if you've ever stood in a room full of power and remembered your worth was built in silence, not applause, then this story is for you. Stay with us. And subscribe now if you believe dignity doesn't shout, it shines. The invitation had come from the Montclair Foundation Board, not from Kyle himself. Seren had RSVP'd for one reason only. Her design firm had been shortlisted for the luxury wing renovations. That's it. It wasn't personal. Not until she walked in. Not until her eyes locked with his across that sea of donors and string quartet melodies. "Seren?" Kyle's tone was casual, but there was something behind it. The way someone says your name not to greet you, but to remind you you're still being watched. She turned smoothly. Not startled, not small, just present. Kyle. He looked the same, annoyingly so. Tailored black suit, single cufflink undone like it was intentional. The same smirk she'd once believed meant admiration. She knew better now. That smirk meant control. And on his arm, as if perfectly staged for the moment, was Vieira. Platinum blonde, bronze skin, expressionless until she spoke. "Oh, you're the Seren, not hi, not nice to meet you, just the Seren." As if she were a chapter in a story Vieira had already rewritten. Seren smiled, polite but steel-edged. "I hope only the good parts made it through." Vieira tilted her head. "We're all adults here. Besides, Kyle's told me everything. Everything." She meant her version of everything. Kyle chuckled. "We've all moved on, haven't we?" That line wasn't innocent. He said it just loud enough for the man standing 2 feet away to hear. The man who turned toward them immediately, recognition blooming in his eyes. Seren Brielle. Kyle Montclair's ex, the one who disappeared after the engagement ended. Seren gave a single nod. Of course, she wouldn't feed his ego. Not here, not ever again. 10 minutes later, she found herself near the exhibit wall, discussing sustainable luxury finishes with one of the advisory board members. She didn't look behind her when she heard laughter. She didn't need to. "She's not like the last one," Kyle repeated, like a joke he wanted to land better this time. "This one gets the lifestyle." Someone chuckled nearby. "Isn't your ex standing over there?" Kyle raised his glass. "If she is, I hope she's taking notes." The board member beside her cleared his throat awkwardly. "Want to step over to the south wing lighting samples?" "Yes," Seren replied smoothly, "before the air gets too thick." In the restroom, Seren stood at the sink, running cold water through her fingers. She didn't cry. She didn't sigh. She just paused. What kind of man bragged like that about the woman he'd discarded? Then again, what kind of woman had she once been to accept love that mocked instead of built? She looked at herself in the mirror. Her plum dress fit perfectly. Her makeup was soft, intentional. She didn't look shaken. She looked like someone who had outgrown the room. And that's exactly how she walked back in. That night, in her Chicago apartment, Seren pulled her hair into a loose bun and stepped out onto the balcony. The skyline sparkled, too busy to care about what happened in ballrooms. She sipped dry red wine and let the stillness hold her. Not because she was lonely, but because peace didn't perform. She had once been in love with Kyle Montclair, the kind of love that made you plan futures you hadn't earned yet. But love like that doesn't last, not when it's planted in ego and watered with control. He had left with noise, married quickly, bragged publicly. She had left quietly, built privately. Her firm, Brielle Studio, now had 3 major hospitality contracts across New York, Miami, and Dallas. She no longer had his last name on her paperwork, but she had her own etched into 4 signed design patents. And that was the truth Kyle didn't see coming. Seren woke up early the next morning, not because of anxiety, but because old habits don't die with heartbreak. They refine with clarity. She didn't check social media. She didn't scan the headlines. Instead, she brewed her favorite green tea, opened her notebook, and reviewed the budget for the Uptown Boutique Hotel project. Her firm's biggest redesign to date. That's who she was now. The woman who turned pain into portfolios. Her phone buzzed on the counter. Kenza, her best friend and operations lead, was texting. "Tell me he didn't open his mouth last night." Seren smiled. "Wider than necessary, as usual. I swear, that man used to be charming. Now he sounds like a press release with a bank account. He called me the last one. And you didn't break a glass. Didn't even blink. God, I love healed you." Seren tucked her phone away. She loved healed her too. 5 years earlier, she was 27, running a boutique interior design studio out of a co-working space in River North. Kyle had walked into her life with a handshake and a business card that weighed more than her entire student loan debt. His development company needed design work, small at first, then personal, then everything. He liked her ideas, then her presence, then her body. And for 2 years, it worked, until it didn't. He changed, subtly at first, then publicly. Seren became too sensitive, too busy, too emotional. He started taking calls in other rooms. He cancelled dinner twice to meet a mutual investor, Vieira. One night, Seren overheard Kyle laughing on the phone. "She doesn't get it," he said. "She doesn't fit where I'm going." She didn't confront him. She packed her things 2 weeks later and never looked back. Back in the present, Seren walked into her studio's morning huddle like she hadn't just faced her past the night before. Her team respected her. They didn't ask invasive questions, but Kenza raised a brow as they reviewed the week's clients. "So, do I tell the intern the Montclair project is off limits, or?" Seren paused, then said calmly, "No. We do what we do best. Let them decide if they're ready." That was her way of saying, "Let's win this contract." 2 days later, the email arrived. Subject, design consultation invitation, Montclair International. The body was short and formal. The sender was a third-party consulting firm, not Kyle. But his name was in the thread. "Mr. Montclair and the executive board are reviewing candidates for a full-scale redesign across several global offices. Your firm was shortlisted based on recent public portfolio work." Seren read it twice. Kyle didn't reach out personally, because he didn't want it to seem like she mattered, and maybe he believed she didn't. But the truth was, her firm had become everything he once said she could be, without him. Kenza walked into her office holding 2 coffee cups. "You look like someone who's holding back a headline." Seren passed her the phone. Kenza read the email, whistled. Well, if it isn't poetic architecture, I'm thinking we prepare a deck, highlight our sustainable work, our user-centered layout models, and the pandemic-responsive redesigns. Want to add a page titled, 'Remember when you mocked me?'" Seren laughed. "No, but we will add the 4 seasons rebuild. That alone tripled our inquiries last quarter." The week leading up to the presentation passed in a quiet storm of focus. Seren didn't rehearse to impress Kyle. She rehearsed to make sure she didn't think about him. She wasn't walking into that boardroom as the she was walking in as the solution. The day of the pitch arrived. Her navy pantsuit was pressed, her edges laid, her documents crisp. When she entered the Montclair building, no one at the reception desk did a double take. No one whispered. She was on the calendar. She was expected. That was the difference between then and now. Before, she was Kyle's guest. Now she was her own authority. In the boardroom, the assistant passed her a glass of water. Another handed her a tablet to upload her deck. Then, the doors opened. Kyle entered. Behind him, Vieira. Seren's eyes didn't flinch. Vieira's face tightened slightly. "Ms. Brielle," Kyle said. Cold. Corporate. "Mr. Montclair," Seren returned. with not 1 inch of emotion. "We'll keep this short," he said. Vieira's laugh was light but sharp. "Good idea. Keep it professional." Seren turned to the board. "Shall we begin?" She started her presentation with user behavior patterns, moved into modular workspace models, showed renderings that reimagined both function and luxury. She mentioned wellness-based design, light optimization, noise zoning, and mental health integration. Not once did she look at Kyle. Not once did she raise her voice. She didn't pitch. She demonstrated. When she ended with the line, "This is not about aesthetics, it's about experience and the environments that shape it," she closed her laptop. Silence. Then one board member leaned forward. Brilliant, clear, visionary. Another nodded. "She knows our workforce better than we do." Kyle adjusted his tie. Vieira looked like she wanted to scratch the table. Kyle opened his mouth, but before he could speak, the COO interjected. "We've reviewed 7 presentations this month," he said, facing Seren. "None as aligned with our needs as yours." Seren nodded once. "Thank you." She didn't smile. As she exited the building, Kyle didn't follow. He didn't need to. She'd already said everything she needed to, without a word. Have you ever been dismissed by someone who thought you'd never rise? Have you ever walked away quietly, only for your silence to echo louder than their spotlight? If Seren's strength reminded you of your own, or the strength you're still building, hit that like button. Drop a comment if you've ever had to rebuild in peace. And if you believe quiet dignity will always outlive loud arrogance, subscribe now to Mr. Charles Stories, where power doesn't have to shout to be real. Your story deserves to be heard, and you belong here. Seren never liked the word survivor. She wasn't in a wreck. She was in a relationship. But some relationships leave bruises that never bloom on skin. And hers had taught her that silence, when misread, becomes a weapon no one expects. That morning, the headlines had nothing to do with her. No blogs, no press photos, no whispers. But her inbox said otherwise. 10 follow-up inquiries, 3 new design requests, and a note from the Montclair CO's office. Expect feedback within 72 hours. Kenza leaned into her doorway with a grin. "You want the good news or the better news?" Seren looked up from her desk. "Start soft." Soft, the Dallas hospitality group that ghosted us last fall, just resent their proposal. Seren raised a brow. "After 6 months?" They said, and I quote, "We've been watching your trajectory." Seren chuckled. "Of course they have. And the better news," she added. Kenza held up her phone. "Montclair's COO just followed us on LinkedIn." By noon, Seren had already reviewed 3 design packages, signed off on a lighting spec correction, and submitted a grant application for a local Women in Design mentorship initiative. She didn't have time for emotional hangovers. But emotion didn't always check her calendar. When she opened her desk drawer to grab a charger, her hand brushed an old moleskin notebook, the kind Kyle used to carry. Her breath caught, not because of him, because of who she had been when she gave that notebook back. 3 years earlier, he had called her dramatic, said she was making things bigger than they were. The night she packed her suitcase, he didn't even ask where she was going, just stared at the wall and muttered, "If you can't handle this life, someone else will," and someone else did. Vieira moved in 3 weeks after Seren moved out, publicly, with photos. Seren didn't respond. She moved into a shared apartment with Kenza, downsized her office, and took contracts no one else wanted, dentist offices, doggy daycares, frozen yogurt chains. And she worked, quietly, consistently, until 2 years later, the Four Seasons in Atlanta called and said, "We need fresh eyes. We heard you don't miss." Now, sitting in a 6th-floor office she owned, Seren knew something Kyle didn't. Revenge rots the inside. But reinvention, that feeds you for life. Later that day, she stopped by a community college on the south side to speak at a workshop for black women entering the design field. Her heels clicked over the tile. Her coat folded over her arm. No makeup retouch needed. She wasn't there to impress. She was there to tell the truth. And the truth was, You don't have to prove anything to someone who already decided not to see you. You just keep building until they have no choice but to sit in rooms shaped by your hands. After her talk, a girl named Leora approached her. I read that article about you, the one with the quote about designing the spaces he walks through. Seren smiled. That one got passed around, huh? Leora nodded. Did you feel powerful when it came out? Seren paused. No, I felt seen. Power didn't matter. What mattered was knowing I'd finally stopped editing myself to be loved. Leora blinked. Dang. Seren leaned in. You'll get it. One day. Hopefully sooner than I did. On her way home that night, her phone rang. Blocked number. She let it go to voicemail. 30 seconds later, it rang again. This time she picked up. Seren. Kyle's voice. Not cold, not smug. Just unsure. Yes? I heard you stopped by headquarters. I presented a design solution. Silence. Then the team seemed impressed. They were more silence. You know, he said slowly. You used to say you didn't like boardrooms. I didn't, but I changed. Growth works like that. You sound different. No, Kyle, she said gently. You're just finally listening. She hung up, not to hurt him, to protect herself. Seren got home, kicked off her heels, and curled on her couch with a bowl of roasted almonds and a sketch pad. On it, she began drawing something. Not a space, not a building, a logo, clean, curved, strong, a new brand mark for a new initiative. Rise L, a non-profit interior design mentorship program for women of color, because sometimes you don't go through the fire just to prove you survived it. You go through it so you can build doors for others to walk through safely. The Montclair office called on a Wednesday. Formal, polite. We'd like to move forward with Brielle Studio as our lead design firm. No one mentioned Kyle. They didn't need to. Seren's work had spoken. The only voice louder than his ego was her execution. She didn't celebrate with champagne. She didn't text anyone first. She turned off the lights in her office, opened the window, and breathed in the January cold like it was truth. Kenza burst into her office 20 minutes later. You're too calm. Are you okay? Did you get the email? Seren nodded once. It's done. Kenza threw her arms up. Girl, I know we've been focused on being graceful and unbothered, but can we be petty for just 5 minutes? Seren smiled. Nope. 1 minute. We're building now. Stay focused. Kenza leaned over the desk. Can I at least wear red to the project kickoff? Seren laughed. Only if it's matte and intimidating. The kickoff meeting was scheduled 2 weeks out. Seren used that time to do what she always did best, prepare quietly and deliver loudly. Floor plan audits, furniture performance assessments, employee traffic flow studies, wellness metrics. She didn't have time to think about Kyle, but Kyle had nothing but time to think about her. He sat in his penthouse corner unit the night before the meeting, scrolling through Seren's firm's website. There she was, confident, calm, framed in golden light with a headline that read, "Design isn't beauty, it's balance, and we build it for the people who live in it." He clicked away. Vieira walked into the room holding a glass of wine and an empty compliment. I told the caterers I want something gluten-free for the gala next week. Don't forget to please reply. Kyle didn't respond. Vieira frowned. Are you even listening? No, he said. Excuse me? He looked at her. Flat. Tired. Not cruel. Just done. Go with someone else. You want to explain to the press why you're not bringing your wife? Kyle stood. I'm tired, Vieira. I'm tired of pretending this looks like partnership. She scoffed. Because she's back. He didn't answer. Because she was right, but not in the way she thought. Seren hadn't come back. She'd risen. And now, he was standing in the shadow of the woman he'd once tried to shrink. The next morning, the team assembled in the main Montclair conference space. Seren walked in with Kenza, 2 senior project managers, and a junior intern, who'd cried when she found out she'd be shadowing the redesign. Kyle sat at the head of the table. He didn't stand. Seren didn't slow. "Good morning," she said, setting her documents down. Vieira wasn't present. Neither was her shadow. The COO smiled. "We're excited to get started." Seren nodded. "We'll be breaking the process into 3 phases: evaluation, prototype, and build. We'll start with staff input, floor traffic capture, and workspace satisfaction surveys. Transparency will be essential." Kyle finally spoke. "Surveys? Yes. You think people are going to be honest?" "If they're not," she replied evenly. "The design will reflect the same dysfunction as the culture." Silence. Kyle leaned back. The CEO chuckled. "Well said." Seren flipped open her notes. "Let's begin." After the meeting, Kyle followed her out. He waited until the hallway was clear. "You've changed." Seren paused. "No," she said. "You finally ran out of room to ignore what you didn't want to see." He didn't speak. "And Seren?" She didn't stay. That night, she opened her email to a flood of DMs from young women asking how she stayed so calm, so quiet, so sure. She didn't answer immediately, but she began drafting a blog post titled, "Success Doesn't Need a Microphone." She ended it with this: "You don't rise by being loud. You rise by building so consistently they have no choice but to enter your atmosphere. Dignity isn't a costume, it's a lifestyle." 3 days later, her phone buzzed again. Blocked number. This time, she answered without hesitation. "Kyle." Again. "I just read your piece. I didn't write it for you. I know. But I read it anyway." Silence. Then, "Did I ever mean anything to you?" Seren's voice was steady. "Yes. But that was before you decided my silence was emptiness instead of restraint." He didn't argue. He didn't ask for another chance. And she didn't offer one. The Monday morning boardroom at Montclair International was all glass and silence. Floor-to-ceiling windows poured in light, but the real spotlight was on the woman standing at the front of the room, placing sketches, models, and digital layouts across the table. Seren Brielle was not nervous. She was prepared. This wasn't a presentation. It was a reckoning in high heels. Kyle walked in late. He always did that. "Power move," he used to say. Except this time, no one looked up. They were already looking at Seren. She nodded once as he sat down. "Good morning," she said. "Let's begin." The board members leaned in. Seren's voice was measured and steady. "We've completed a full traffic and behavior study over the past 10 days. Your staff want more light, fewer barriers, clearer acoustics, and better lounge zones for flexible collaboration." She clicked to the next slide. The layout glowed on screen, airy, sharp, modern. No one uses the south-facing cubicles. They're too dark. The executive wing blocks sun for 80% of the 9th floor. A murmur rippled through the room. Kyle's jaw flexed. She went on. "These offices weren't designed around the people working in them. They were built to showcase power. That model is outdated. Productivity now comes from psychological safety, movement, and natural light access." She paused, then delivered the line that sealed it. "I'm not redesigning this company's office. I'm redesigning how your people feel when they walk into work every day." The room fell still. Then someone clapped. Then another, until most of the room joined. Kyle didn't, but he didn't interrupt either, because he knew there was nothing to say that wouldn't make him look smaller. After the meeting, a female board member named Sienna caught up with Seren near the elevators. "Your presentation," she said, eyes bright. It wasn't just smart, it was fearless. Seren smiled softly. It was honest. "I heard whispers about you and Kyle," Sienna said carefully. Seren didn't deny it. "And yet, you walked in like he was just another chair at the table." Seren shrugged. "That's exactly what he was." Back upstairs, Kyle sat in his office staring out at the skyline. He could still hear her words. "Power isn't about the corner office anymore. It's about how people feel inside it." He ran a hand over his jaw. He didn't recognize this version of her, because he never really knew her strength, only her silence. Later that afternoon, he messaged his assistant. "Send me her full project schedule." "All of it?" "Yes." He wanted to know where she'd be. He told himself it was logistics. But part of him needed to understand how someone he once called soft now made entire rooms adjust to her rhythm. That evening, Seren sat across from Kenza at a corner cafe, picking at a salad she barely touched. Kenza leaned in. "You leveled that boardroom." "I didn't need to." "The truth did." Kenza sipped her iced tea. "You okay?" Seren hesitated. "I keep thinking about how I let him narrate me for so long. I stopped correcting the story because I thought silence meant peace. And now," Seren looked her dead in the eye, "now I know silence doesn't mean hiding. It means saving your voice for something bigger." Before they left, Seren checked her email. The COO had sent a note. "Your insights have already begun to shift conversations internally. It's clear you're not just designing space, you're shifting mindset." Seren closed the message and smiled to herself. She wasn't there to make noise. She was there to build the new. 3 days after the boardroom presentation, Seren was back on site. She didn't announce her arrival. She never needed to. Her presence spoke for itself, clipboard in hand, hair tied up, eyes focused as she walked the floors of Montclair HQ alongside a structural engineer and acoustic consultant. This wasn't a photo op. It was work. And the people who used to overlook her now waited for her input before moving a chair. Kyle watched her from behind a smoked glass divider. She had a quiet efficiency to her now. Back when they were together, she used to second-guess every proposal she drafted, afraid of saying the wrong thing, afraid he'd question her logic. Now, she didn't ask for space. She took it. One floor manager whispered to another, "She's the only one who's listened to what the staff actually need." Kyle heard that, and for once, he didn't feel insulted. He felt irrelevant. That afternoon, Seren paused in the staff lounge with Kenza, reviewing fixture samples and paint swatches. "This is where the problem lives," Seren said, pointing to a corner where 2 ceiling lights buzzed inconsistently. Noise pollution, inconsistent lighting, and zero ergonomic flow. Kenza scribbled notes. "Want to repurpose the print area into a mental recharge zone?" Seren nodded. "Add greenery, reduce hard echoes, and mount modular seating. People need rooms that let them breathe." Kyle approached from behind. His voice broke the rhythm. Didn't know design needed therapy principles. Seren turned, calm and unbothered. "Design is human behavior. If your spaces are anxious, so are your people." Kyle folded his arms. "You always did see things. Others didn't." She raised an eyebrow. "You say that like it's new." There was an awkward silence. Then he asked, "Can we talk later? Just us?" Kenza looked up, lips tight. Seren didn't answer right away. Then, coolly, after the 5 p.m. review. Briefly, at 5:14, Kyle walked into the meeting room where Seren was wrapping up notes with her team. He waited until everyone else left. She didn't offer a seat. He took one anyway. "You don't have to be so cold," he said. Seren closed her notebook. "You mistook distance for coldness. That's your problem." "I didn't mean for things to end the way they did," he said. "I was ambitious. I didn't know what I wanted." "Yes, you did," she said. "You wanted someone who didn't challenge you." He swallowed. She continued, voice even. "I was never angry you left. I was angry at how easily you mocked what we had, just to make yourself feel bigger." Kyle's gaze dropped. "I see it now." "You don't have to," she replied. "That's the beauty of healing. It doesn't ask for permission." He leaned forward. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we—" No, just one word. But it ended the sentence, the moment, and the memory trying to cling. Seren stood. "This project isn't about you. It's about the people who've had to work in your noise for too long. Let's not confuse legacy with ego." She walked out. Kyle didn't follow. This time, he finally understood he couldn't. Outside the building, The air was crisp. Seren looked up at the structure she was rebuilding from the inside out. She wasn't erasing her past. She was building right through it. Steel, glass, and grace. And the one thing she never gave him, closure, because she didn't need it anymore. Kyle didn't sleep that night. He lay on the edge of his California king bed, staring at the ceiling in the dark, counting regrets like cracks in drywall. Not regrets about marrying Vieira. Regrets about everything before that. Regrets about how he left Seren. Regrets about what he said about her to people who never even knew her. Regrets that didn't feel like guilt, but truth. Finally exposed. Vieira had noticed his distance. She always noticed, but rarely asked anymore. Instead, she filled the void with curated Instagram moments and gala invitations, hoping noise would cover silence. Tonight, she didn't even come to bed. Kyle didn't ask why. He knew. At 2:37 a.m., he scrolled through his contacts and stopped at the one name he'd never deleted. Seren Brielle, he hesitated. Then tapped. Rang once. Twice. She answered on the third. Kyle. Her voice wasn't angry. It was clear. Controlled. Yes, he said. Sorry it's late. It is. He paused. I couldn't sleep. That's not my problem. No, he admitted. It's mine. Silence. Then she said, say what you called to say. He took a breath. I saw you today. I mean, really saw you. And I realized I spent years convincing myself you weren't enough, just so I didn't have to admit I wasn't ready for someone who already was. Seren didn't respond right away. She let his words sit. Then she said, I'm not flattered. I didn't call to flatter you. Good. Because I'm not angry either. He blinked. You're not? No. Anger left years ago. What stayed was the lesson. What lesson? That you only respected me once you saw others did. He exhaled sharply. It hurt because it was true. Seren continued. You used to mock my silence like it meant weakness. But silence is what gave me back my voice. It's what helped me hear who I was without your noise in the background. Kyle whispered, you always had a way with words. I always had truth. You just never liked how it sounded. Another silence stretched across the line. Finally, she added, don't call again. Not like this. Not for clarity. Find that on your own. Click. The line went dead. But Kyle stayed there, phone pressed to his chest. She hadn't yelled. She hadn't cursed. She hadn't begged. She simply closed the chapter he never thought would end without his signature. Meanwhile, Seren sat on the edge of her bed, phone still warm in her hand. She stared out the window. The skyline was the same, but everything else had changed. She was done explaining who she was to someone who didn't want to know the first time. The next morning, she added a quote to the wall of her firm's common room. Growth is silent. Until it speaks without needing to raise its voice. Everyone on her team paused to read it. Kenza gave her a knowing look. Seren didn't explain. She didn't need to anymore. That Friday, Seren arrived at Montclair HQ earlier than usual. She wore a charcoal jumpsuit, simple gold studs, and black flats. No drama. No softness to be mistaken for fragility. She was there to walk through the final implementation blueprint with the executive team, minus Kyle. He was out of town for unrelated meetings. Everyone knew that meant he was avoiding facing her success. And she didn't mind. The work moved faster when the noise stayed out of the room. Kenza pulled her aside as they finished presenting the second phase design map. I got a call from the Mirror Group, she whispered. They want you to keynote their Women in Power series. Seren raised a brow. Public speaking, they said, you're exactly the kind of quiet storm people are learning to follow. Seren smiled. I'll think about it. She wasn't chasing lights, but she wouldn't hide from them either. Meanwhile, in San Francisco, Kyle sat in a hotel bar, nursing a whiskey he didn't want. He'd spent the day in meetings that felt useless, unfocused, disconnected, and now he was alone with too many thoughts. A notification popped up on his screen. Brielle Studio, Phase 2 preview now live. He clicked out of instinct, and there she was, Seren, in the center of a 3D rendering walkthrough, calm, direct, poised. This phase, her voice explained in the video, is where comfort meets function. We don't want people to adjust to the workspace. We want the workspace to adjust to them. Her tone didn't try to impress. It simply knew. He closed the laptop and swallowed what felt like a memory that wouldn't go down. Back at the office, Seren gathered her team around a table for an informal debrief. They laughed, debated textures, compared lighting conditions, shared cookies someone brought from a local bakery. These weren't just colleagues. They were witnesses. They'd seen her hold steady through shade, pressure, and invisible expectations, and now they watched her lead, not louder, but clearer. After the meeting, Sienna, the board member who had been quietly cheering her on, approached. "You do realize you're shifting the entire tone of this company, right?" Seren smiled. One square foot at a time. Sienna touched her arm gently. "You were never the shadow. You were the foundation." The words settled deep, because they were true. That weekend, Seren stayed home. She didn't attend a gala. She didn't please reply to any appearances. She cooked a meal for herself, lit a candle, played her favorite Nina Simone record. She reread her old journal entries, some from the years with Kyle. She didn't tear them out. She didn't burn them. She didn't pretend those days didn't happen. She simply closed the book, placed it on the shelf, and said quietly to no one, "I'm not who you left. I'm who I built." On Sunday night, Kyle called again. This time, she didn't pick up, and he didn't leave a message, because even he knew, when silence becomes your closure, you don't need the person who created the noise to explain it anymore. The Montclair headquarters had started to shift, not just in layout, but in spirit. It wasn't immediate, but change never is. The break rooms no longer felt like holding pens. Departments that rarely interacted now shared ideas in open lounges. The third floor, once dead space, had become a creative zone, humming with design and development synergy. All of it tied back to Seren Brielle, and she wasn't even finished yet. Monday morning began with quiet wins. A department head sent her team coffee for no reason. The janitor left a note on her desk that read, "Thank you for remembering we matter too." And the intern, who once panicked in her first meeting, now walked with a clipboard and confidence. Seren noticed it all. That's what power looks like when it's real. It moves through people, not around them. At 9 a.m., the leadership team gathered for a progress report. Seren led the presentation as usual, and Kyle, as he'd done for the past 2 weeks, remained seated in silence while the room applauded her updates. But today, something was different. He asked a question. Not a defensive one, not a challenge, a real question. "What do you need from us in this final phase?" The room shifted slightly. Not because of what he asked, but because it was the first time Kyle Montclair had ever asked anyone outside his inner circle what they needed. Seren didn't gloat. She answered calmly. "Support with the staff retraining initiative. If they don't know how to use the new environment, they won't trust it." Kyle nodded. Done, just like that. No back and forth. No condescension. Just respect. Real, earned, quiet respect. After the meeting, Sienna approached her in the hallway. "You felt that too, right?" she asked. Seren glanced back toward the glass doors Kyle had just walked through. "I did," she said. "But change isn't a moment, it's momentum. One meeting doesn't erase what came before." Sienna nodded. "No. But it says something when the person who once tried to silence you starts asking how to support your voice." Kenza met her in the elevator with a crooked smile. Did he just respectfully participate? Seren smiled. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves." "Oh, I'm not. I'm just taking screenshots of his facial expressions and saving them for my personal archive." They both laughed, but under that laughter was something else. Relief. The shift wasn't about Kyle. It was about the work, and the work was changing people. Even him. Later that afternoon, Seren visited one of the breakout lounges under renovation. The space had been redesigned with layered lighting, textured acoustic panels, and modular seating. But more importantly, it had been reshaped with people in mind. She sat down next to a junior designer sketching color themes on her tablet. The woman looked up, startled. "Oh, Miss Brielle. Sorry, I didn't see you. No need to apologize. This space is for everyone." The woman smiled, then hesitated. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Were you always this confident?" Seren leaned back. "No, but I was always aware of how small I was being asked to be." She paused. "Confidence wasn't given to me. I had to build it with everything that was taken from me." The woman's eyes glistened. "That's what I want to learn." "You will," Seren said. "Start by not apologizing for being here." Meanwhile, Kyle sat in his office, replaying the moment Seren spoke about staff retraining. It wasn't what she said. It was how everyone listened. He remembered a time when boardrooms only looked at him. And now, they looked at her. He didn't feel envy. He felt curiosity about who he could have been if he had chosen growth instead of dominance. That night, Vieira confronted him. Again. "I saw the email." He looked up from his laptop. "Which one?" "From your COO. About Seren's expansion. Why is she being allowed to touch our global offices?" Kyle sighed. "Because she's better than the people we've used before. She's your ex. She's also the most qualified voice in the building." Vieira crossed her arms. "You're still in love with her." Kyle shook his head. "I'm in awe of her. There's a difference." Vieira's expression shifted. She'd expected denial. She got honesty. Across the city, Seren had dinner with her mentor, an architect named Belen Grant. Belen had known her since college, a woman of few words and even fewer compliments. But tonight, over roasted eggplant and wild rice, Belen said, "You ever think about what your silence did?" Seren looked up. "What do you mean?" "You walked away. And in doing so, you told him the one truth his world never taught him." "What's that?" "That he wasn't needed for you to rise." They sat in that stillness. No ego, just truth. And maybe that was the final power move. Not revenge, not exposure, not proving anything, but simply existing so boldly that the world reshaped itself around your peace. Kyle arrived at the Midtown site late. The Montclair branch there was in phase 1 of its redesign. The same blueprints Seren had created. New walls were being reframed, soundproofing installed, skylight permits pending. Everything was changing, but Kyle wasn't there to inspect construction. He was there to walk through the space, quietly, alone, and maybe to understand the world that was now built without his fingerprints. The local lead manager, a woman named Tilda, spotted him as he entered the floor. "Mr. Montclair," she said. "Didn't expect you here today. Just passing through. Wanted to see how things were going." She walked him toward the central hallway. "It's been smooth. Seren's team is—" "She doesn't like to be called by her first name casually," Kyle interrupted. "It's Miss Brielle." "In meetings." Tilda blinked. Of course, he'd never said that before. Not about anyone. As they walked, Kyle noticed something small but unmistakable. The hallway was wider. Not much, but enough to allow two people to walk side by side comfortably. He remembered when he insisted on narrower corridors to maximize office space. Seren had once questioned it. He'd dismissed her with, "We're not building a park." Now, the hallway felt humane, simple, smart. He said nothing. But his silence didn't come from disapproval this time. It came from realization. Back at Brielle's studio, Seren was sketching adjustments for the final Montclair floor plate. Kenza entered, holding a printed magazine and a face that said, "You're going to want to sit down for this." "Please don't tell me Vieira wrote an op-ed," Seren said, not looking up. "No. But someone else did." She dropped the magazine in front of her. It was a feature in Vision Built Weekly, a top architecture and design publication. Seren's face was on the cover, mid-speech, during her panel 3 weeks earlier. The headline read, "The Woman Behind the Walls, How Seren Brielle is Redesigning Power." Seren stared at it. They didn't even mention Kyle. Didn't need to. This was her work. Her mind. Her journey. Front page. Without apology. Inside, the article quoted her keynote. Design isn't just about space. It's about the unspoken expectations we place on people when they enter that space. If you keep building like power matters more than people, don't be surprised when your people stop performing. And then, further down, another line. There's nothing more dangerous than a woman who no longer needs to be believed in, because she already believes in herself. Kenza grinned. I'm framing it. Seren closed the magazine slowly. No. We keep moving. Headlines aren't the finish line. They're just loud mile markers. But that night, when she got home, she placed the magazine on her entry table. Not as a trophy, as a reminder. Kyle saw the article too. Of course he did. The headline landed in his inbox before he opened his newsfeed. He stared at her photo on the cover, a freeze frame of strength, and something cracked inside him. Not jealousy, not desire, something deeper. Respect. Maybe for the first time, he was capable of it. The next day, Seren received a handwritten note at her office. From Kyle. Short, tight handwriting. Seren, you were never the shadow. You were the light I couldn't look at long enough. I was too small to see it. This time, I saw. Thank you for building something I couldn't destroy. Kyle. She read it once, then again. Then set it down. She didn't text him, didn't call, didn't reply. She simply placed the note in the back of her desk drawer, not for keeping, but for remembering. Some apologies don't need acknowledgement. Some closure is complete the moment it's spoken. By the end of the week, the full Montclair redesign was entering its final planning stage. Seren stood on the rooftop of the HQ with the lead architects, watching the sunset over the city she once thought she'd have to leave to be respected. But she stayed, and she changed the skyline, without ever raising her voice. One of the junior leads asked her quietly, "Do you think he regrets losing you?" Seren turned slowly. "It doesn't matter." "Why not?" "Because I stopped living like his opinion held the blueprint for my value." The rooftop breeze picked up. Seren looked out and smiled. The walls they were building weren't hers, but the woman behind them? She finally was. Have you ever had to build in silence while someone tried to bury your voice? Have you ever realized the person who once doubted you now walks through the world you reshaped? If Seren's journey reminded you that dignity doesn't chase applause, it creates legacy, drop a comment and share your favorite moment from this chapter. Like this video if you believe quiet power always wins in the end. And if you know someone who needs that reminder today, share this story with them. Subscribe to Mr. Charles Stories, where grace, strength and truth lead every story forward. Because your silence was never weakness. It was preparation. The press wasn't kind. They rarely are when they smell insecurity wrapped in luxury. After Seren's vision-built weekly feature exploded across social platforms, the contrast became unavoidable. In boardrooms, in gossip circles, even among donors. On one side stood Seren Brielle, polished, respected, unbothered. On the other, Vieira Montclair, beautiful, curated, forgotten. Vieira wasn't used to being ignored. She was used to being photographed, admired, doted on, not compared, and definitely not compared to Seren. But that's what the whispers were saying now. She's not like the ex, someone had said during a Montclair fundraiser 2 nights ago. The ex built something, and Vieira had heard it. She heard everything. Monday morning, she stormed into Kyle's office. "You need to control this," she snapped, slamming her tablet down in front of him. Kyle didn't flinch. "Control what?" "She's everywhere. That magazine piece. Did you even read it?" He didn't answer. "I told you, we should have blacklisted her from internal contracts years ago." Kyle finally looked up. "She wasn't someone you blacklist. She was someone you should have learned from." Vieira blinked. "Excuse me? You married the man you thought had power, but you've never once understood how it was built." She scoffed. "Don't turn this into some poetic apology." Kyle stood slowly. "I'm not apologizing. I'm telling you the truth. What Seren has, you can't fake. You can't PR your way into relevance. You either change people's lives or you don't. That afternoon, Vieira made a call. A private PR agency. Discreet. Expensive. She wanted a profile piece, something polished, something that reasserted her image. "Tell the world who I am," she told them. But the interview didn't go as planned, because when asked about her role at Montclair, Vieira stumbled. She hadn't contributed to strategy. She hadn't spearheaded any initiatives. She hadn't built anything. The journalist's voice was kind, but the questions weren't. "Do you have any public work we can reference?" Silence. "Anything that reflects your leadership?" More silence. She ended the call early. No headlines would be written. Not the kind she wanted. Back at Brielle's studio, Seren was reviewing final acoustic renderings when Kenza walked in. She tried it. Seren didn't look up. Vieira scheduled an interview with Modern Profile. They passed. Seren blinked once. "And? That's it." Seren returned to her screen. "Let's stay focused." Kenza folded her arms. "You're not even curious what she said?" "No," Seren said, "because people who build don't look over their shoulder at people who pose." Meanwhile, Kael sat through a board strategy session where Seren's designs were now standard across the brand. He watched men and women who once rolled their eyes at her vision now fight to adopt it faster. "She's reshaping how teams work," the COO said. "Not just where they work." Kael nodded quietly. He didn't defend his past. He didn't insert himself. He let the admiration live where it belonged, with her. Vieira's unraveling wasn't explosive. It was quiet. Her social invites thinned. Her circle narrowed. And the final blow came from a friend she trusted. Over brunch, that friend had said, "You're gorgeous, V. But what do you do?" That word stuck in her throat for hours afterward. Do. Because for years, she'd coasted on presence. Now the world wanted contribution. And she had none. At home, she confronted Kyle again. "She's making me look like a joke." "No," Kyle said. "You're doing that yourself." He didn't say it with cruelty. He said it with exhaustion. Vieira stood in the middle of their penthouse living room and realized something devastating. She had spent her marriage being the image, not the engine. And engines were what people respected. That evening, a board member called Kyle privately. "She's creating waves of loyalty inside your own company. People are following her." Kyle replied, "I know. You okay with that?" "I am. You're not worried about your influence?" "I'm not worried," Kyle said. "I'm watching." Later that night, Seren got a message from an anonymous sender. Funny how the woman who was mocked is now the blueprint. She didn't respond. Didn't need to. She simply set her alarm, finished reviewing her schedule for the next day, and rested. Because when someone finally realizes they built the table, others tried to push them away from. They don't fight for the seat anymore. They lead from wherever they stand. Vieira didn't leave immediately, not at first. Instead, she clung to the last shreds of status, the invitations, the legacy perks, the illusion of control. She still attended luncheons and whispered her last name louder than her purpose. But something had shifted. The stares weren't adoring anymore. They were curious. How long would she last now that everyone saw who the real builder was? 3 weeks after the Montclair redesign rollout was announced internally, a new company-wide survey went live. It wasn't about the space. It was about culture. And the data was clear. Employees felt heard. Departments were more productive. Morale had lifted. The most consistent reason? We feel like the people making decisions finally care how we experience the company. No one mentioned Kyle. No one mentioned Vieira. But Seren's influence was in every word. At home, Vieira poured herself a glass of wine and stared at her reflection. She couldn't remember the last time she felt powerful, not just admired, but centered. Not once, since marrying Kyle, had she built anything that couldn't be photographed. And now? Even her reflection felt unfamiliar. She slid her wedding ring off. Not in drama, in clarity. Meanwhile, Seren was in her element, finalizing design walkthroughs, guiding staff training sessions, hosting Q&A circles with department heads. The Montclair staff didn't just respect her, they trusted her, because she wasn't interested in being impressive. She was interested in being useful. Kenza walked into her office one morning, holding a folder. 3 new proposals came in. Seren looked up. From Lucent Bank, Hulston Aerospace, and the Westbridge Group. Seren blinked. Those are huge. They've seen what you did at Montclair. They want to know if lightning strikes twice. Seren stood, walked to the window. Beyond the skyline, she saw the same city she'd once wanted to run from. Now, it looked different. Not because the buildings had changed, but because she had. Later that evening, Kyle stood in the center of Montclair's newly finished executive lounge, now transformed from cold marble to warm oak and natural light. A staff member walked in and paused. "I used to hate coming here," she said softly. Kyle looked up. "Why?" "Felt like a museum. Now it feels human." He nodded, but said nothing, because he hadn't designed this place. He'd only funded it. And the woman who did design it, she hadn't asked for his input. She hadn't needed it. That night, he went home to an empty penthouse. Vieira had left. A note on the counter read, "I spent too long performing power beside you, when I should have been defining it for myself. This isn't about her anymore. It's about me." Kyle didn't get angry. He didn't call her. He sat down, turned on a lamp, and looked at his reflection in the glass. For the first time, he didn't see a man at the top. He saw a man standing on what used to be enough, before he realized he'd mocked the only woman who ever showed him what real power looked like. At the same time, across the city, Seren was packing up her office. Not because she was leaving, because she was expanding. A second location, Brielle Studio West Side, was launching in 3 months. This time, it would include a training center, mentorship rooms, a scholarship fund, because she knew the foundation wasn't enough if the next generation didn't have access to build on it. During a quiet team dinner, one of her project coordinators asked, "How did you know you were finally done with proving anything to him?" Seren took a breath. "I didn't," she said. "I just realized I was building something too big for his name to fit on, and that was the truth." Kyle had mocked her for not playing the role. Now the whole industry was adjusting to the room she created, not with noise, with design, with integrity, with grace, and there's no mockery in the world strong enough to outlive that. The invitation arrived as an email with a bold header. "Women who build, redefining power in design and development. You've been selected as a featured speaker on our executive panel in New York City." Seren read it twice before leaning back in her chair. Kenza peeked into her office moments later, holding 2 iced coffees. "Did you see it yet?" Seren lifted her phone. "I did." Front stage, prime slot, next to Lane Wexler and Monica Gare. Those weren't just names. They were pillars. Women who ran billion-dollar firms, taught at top universities, mentored entire generations. And now, Seren Brielle was being seated beside them. 2 weeks later, the event filled the mezzanine floor of the Grand Monarch Hotel in Midtown Manhattan. Polished wood paneling, velvet seats, a sea of well-dressed professionals from every corner of the architecture, design, and corporate world. Seren sat backstage with the other panelists, each of them mic'd and powdered. Kenza leaned over with a whisper. "Breathe, but also, you belong here." Seren gave a small smile. "I know, not cocky, not hesitant." She said it like someone who finally believed it all the way down to her bones. Back in Chicago, Kyle watched the live stream from his office. Alone, no interruptions, no distractions, just the image of the woman he once underestimated, now being asked to speak for the whole industry. The moderator's voice rang out. "Let's start with a question for Ms. Brielle. When did you realize you no longer had to prove yourself, and just got to be yourself?" Seren leaned toward her mic and smiled. "There's a moment," she said, "when silence stops being about protection and becomes a choice." The room hushed. You spend so long shrinking your ideas so they don't offend power. Then one day you realize, Real power doesn't shrink other people. It makes room for them. Applause broke out. Kyle stared at the screen. She wasn't speaking about him directly, but she didn't need to. She was speaking a truth he had once silenced in her, and now the world was clapping for it. The moderator asked another question. You've worked with legacy corporations, billionaire founders, private boards. How do you navigate spaces that weren't built with you in mind? Seren nodded once. I redesigned them. Laughter, more applause. She added, but seriously, I ask what no one else wants to admit. Who is this space actually serving? Because if it only serves power, it's broken before we even lay the first tile. Backstage after the panel, Lane Wexler pulled her aside. I've read your work. Quiet brilliance is rare. You're not just shifting design. You're shifting leadership culture. Seren's breath caught. Lane had been a role model since her grad school days. Thank you, she said. But Lane wasn't done. Back home that weekend, Kyle sat on his balcony overlooking the skyline. He hadn't touched a drink in days, hadn't gone out, hadn't posted anything online. He'd only watched, observed, and reckoned, because the woman he once joked didn't understand the lifestyle was now rewriting what power looked like on a global scale. And he was a footnote, a lesson, not the main character anymore. Meanwhile, Seren returned to Chicago, greeted by flowers in her office, a feature article circulating online, and a client request from Holston Aerospace. But none of it rattled her, because applause wasn't the goal anymore. Impact was. Later that night, she sat on her couch wrapped in a light blanket, her laptop open to emails she hadn't responded to yet. An anonymous one caught her eye. No name. Just a message. I know what I lost, and I know now it was never yours to fix. She didn't need to guess who sent it, and she didn't reply, because truth, once lived fully, doesn't need a witness to be real. The next morning, Seren visited Rise-El, the mentorship initiative she had built. 12 young women sat in a semicircle around her, eyes wide, notebooks open. One asked, "What's the one thing you'd tell your past self before everything happened?" Seren smiled gently. "I'd say, you're not difficult. You're detailed, and the right people will never be intimidated by your clarity." A pause. Then another young voice asked, "Do you ever miss him?" Seren didn't dodge. "I don't miss who I thought he was, and I'm proud of who I had to become because he couldn't see it." The girls didn't clap. They nodded. That's the difference between performance and presence. One wants noise. The other needs truth. Kyle didn't send flowers. He didn't text her congratulations. But a week after the panel, he sent a formal invitation to meet, for coffee at a quiet local spot, away from corporate walls and polished surfaces. Seren read it twice before forwarding it to Kenza. With one line, "What do you think?" Kenza replied in under 10 seconds, "Only go if you're not looking for closure, just observation." Seren stared at the message, then closed her laptop. She already had closure. She chose the cafe, not him. Neutral ground, no corporate pretense, just wood tables, warm lights, and the soft hum of jazz through ceiling speakers. Kyle was already there when she arrived, sitting by the window. No tie, no performance, just him, and when she stepped through the door, he stood. She noticed that. He'd never used to. "Thanks for coming," he said. "I have 15 minutes, she replied. He nodded, accepting her terms. She sat down and ordered tea. He had black coffee, half full, untouched. The silence between them wasn't heavy. It was unfamiliar, and unfamiliar was better than fake comfort. "I watched your panel," he said finally. "I figured you said something that stayed with me, about silence being a choice." She didn't respond. He went on. "For a long time, I mistook your stillness for indecision, your calm for weakness. I thought because you didn't argue, I was right." Seren tilted her head slightly. "And now, I realize you weren't trying to win me. You were trying not to lose yourself." He looked down. "I made you small." Seren didn't flinch. That's because you were afraid of what would happen if I took up space. He nodded. I was, he said. I'm not proud of that. Outside, people passed. Life moved. But inside, for a brief moment, two people sat with the history they once lived in. Kyle swallowed. I'm sorry I mocked you, for how you think, for what you needed, for how you loved. Seren blinked. I never needed an apology. I know. But I needed to say it. She looked at him closely. You understand now because the world finally respects me. Kyle didn't deny it. But you had the choice to see it before they did. And you didn't. I wasn't ready. No, Seren said. You weren't willing. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. Are you happy? She smiled gently. Yes, because I live in alignment with myself now. My work, my rest, my voice. None of it depends on who's watching. Kyle looked away. I used to think power was about being undeniable. Seren shook her head. Power is about not needing to be validated. He didn't ask for another chance. And she didn't leave room for one. Because sometimes the full circle moment isn't a door reopening. It's a mirror being placed gently between two people, so they can both walk away, seeing themselves honestly for the first time. As she stood to leave, Kyle said, I hope someday people talk about me the way they talk about you now. Seren looked at him and said quietly, then start listening to people before the world forces you to. She walked out, not empowered, not triumphant, just grounded. The kind of grounded that happens when you no longer perform healing for someone else's redemption. That night, Seren journaled, not to process, but to document. He finally saw me. But more importantly, I saw who I've become in the years since he didn't. She closed the book, lit a candle, and let stillness wrap around her like armor. Because the woman who was once mocked in a ballroom now sat on global stages. Not to prove anything, but to remind others. You don't have to raise your voice to raise the standard. Kyle stood in his penthouse at 10:17 p.m., looking out at a city he no longer felt connected to. The same skyline he once conquered now felt distant. Not because it had changed, but because he had fallen behind. Not financially, not professionally, but personally, because somewhere between building his empire and chasing recognition, he'd lost the one person who genuinely saw him before the world tried to shape him into something else. And the woman he once dismissed as too quiet was now being quoted in boardrooms he couldn't even get invited to anymore. It wasn't jealousy. It wasn't regret. It was clarity. For the first time, Kyle wasn't asking what went wrong. He knew. He had valued appearance over substance, legacy over love, noise over meaning. And now, he watched interviews of Seren, like someone replaying security footage after a break-in, not to stop the crime, but to understand what they failed to protect. In one clip, she said, people often confuse presence with power, but real power doesn't perform. It shifts rooms without needing applause. He watched it 3 times, then closed his laptop and just sat in silence. The next day, at Montclair HQ, the new workspace was officially unveiled. Media, executives, staff, no Kyle. He didn't attend, because the day wasn't about him, and he didn't want to be a shadow standing in someone else's light. Instead, Seren took the stage with the CEO beside her. No flash, no spectacle, just steady leadership. We redesigned this space not to impress visitors, but to honor the people who spend their lives working here, she said. Because buildings don't create culture. People do. The applause was long, full, genuine. In the crowd, one of the senior developers leaned over to a colleague. She changed the whole energy of this place, he whispered. And she never raised her voice once. Later that afternoon, Seren toured the upper floors, stopping to speak with employees, answer questions, and listen, really listen, to feedback. She wasn't the star. She was the steward, and that's why people followed her, not because she demanded it, but because they felt seen in her presence. Meanwhile, Kyle sat in his office staring at his calendar. Empty. No media bookings, no board meetings, just space. too much of it. He turned his chair, pulled open his drawer, and found the leather-bound notebook he used to keep when he and Seren were still together. The last thing written in it? A sketch she made of a shared home they once dreamed about, tucked between mountains with big windows and silence wrapped around it. She had called it The Retreat. He laughed bitterly, because now all he had was silence, but not the kind that heals, the kind that reminds you what you let go. Later that week, his assistant, Ria, stepped into his office. "Just confirming, you're not attending the donor dinner this Saturday?" "No," he said flatly. "Should I send a gift in your name?" "Don't send anything." Ria hesitated. Then, carefully, "I know this may be out of line, but the team feels different now. Lighter." He looked up. She continued, gently. "Ms. Brielle didn't just bring design, she brought a new rhythm. And I think people realized they could breathe again." He nodded once, then dismissed her, not with cruelty, but with understanding. She was right. Back at Brielle's studio, Seren wrapped up a weekly team meeting when Kenza tossed her a newspaper. Page 6. Seren flipped it open. A feature story on Montclair's transformation. The headline read, "From Status to Substance, Inside the Company's Cultural Shift." No photos of Kyle, no mention of his name, only quotes from staff, praise for Seren, mentions of improved morale, innovation, balance. Kenza leaned back. "Remember when his name used to be in every headline?" Seren closed the paper. Now he's learning what silence really feels like. That night, Kyle went for a walk. No driver, no entourage, just him. He passed by a bookstore and saw a sign in the window, Seren Brielle, featured guest next week. The Architecture of Power. He stopped, stared at it for a full minute, then turned and walked the other way, because he wasn't ready to sit in a room full of people who now saw her the way he never had. The bookstore was small, independent, and packed to capacity, every seat taken, every hallway crowded. Seren stood near the register, surrounded by copies of her debut book, The Architecture of Power, Designing from the Inside Out. The event wasn't flashy. No sponsor logos, no velvet ropes, just conversation, meaning, and people leaning in to listen. Kenza introduced her to the crowd. Most people are handed a title before they're trusted with responsibility, but this woman earned trust before anyone handed her anything. Applause. Seren took the mic. Calm, balanced, clear. "Thank you for being here," she began. "I don't believe in being the loudest voice in the room. I believe in building rooms where more voices can be heard." That was her power. She didn't make herself the center. She made the circle bigger. Outside, Kyle stood across the street. He hadn't planned to come, but here he was, watching from behind glass, listening through a cracked door. No one noticed him, and for the first time he didn't mind. He wasn't meant to be in the room. He was meant to understand why. Inside, a woman in the audience asked, "What was the moment you knew you'd made it?" Seren smiled softly. "I never think about it that way," she said. "But I do remember the moment I stopped asking for validation from people who benefited from my silence." A pause. Then she added, "And I remember the moment I realized peace didn't need permission." The audience was quiet, holding her words like currency. Back across the street, Kyle stepped away from the window. A man beside him recognized him and whispered, "You're the ex, right?" Kyle didn't answer, but he didn't walk away either. Back home, Seren lit a candle and sat on her balcony. The stars weren't particularly visible, but the air was cool and the wind calm. She opened a notebook, not to journal this time, but to sketch. Something new. A retreat center. Not for luxury, but for rest. For underfunded creators. For working mothers. For anyone rebuilding after being silenced. A space that said, "You don't have to prove anything to belong here." At the same time, Kyle sat in his kitchen staring at the signed divorce papers Vieira had sent through her attorney. He hadn't touched them, but tonight, he signed. Not because he was angry, but because he finally understood. You can't keep someone beside you with spotlight alone. Eventually, They crave substance, and he had failed to offer it. He walked to his study and opened the leather notebook again. This time, he wrote something. Not for her, for himself. She rose without me, and the world applauded, not because I left, but because she stayed rooted while I made noise. He closed it, set it down, and for once, didn't try to be anything but quiet. The next morning, Seren walked through her studio as sunlight spilled across the floor. She passed framed sketches, her staff working, and the sound of printers warming up. Her life was loud with movement, but soft in intention. And that balance? She got an email notification. Subject: Request for Corporate Leadership Roundtable, hosted by Wexler and Gare. She was being invited as the opening keynote. Attached was a message. Your work has shifted more than architecture. It's shifted expectations. We want the world to hear from the woman who doesn't just design buildings, but cultures. Seren smiled. This time, she didn't hesitate. She said yes. Because this wasn't a return. It was a rise. And the people who once doubted her. They could either evolve or watch. Seren arrived at the Wexler and Gare roundtable in a dark emerald suit, heels that didn't scream for attention, and confidence that didn't need to. The event was held in a converted opera house, arched ceilings, spotlight domes, and chairs filled with industry powerhouses. Executives, architects, tech founders, finance moguls, and now, her, no longer invited as someone's plus one, not as the wife of, but as the keynote speaker. She stepped on stage. Behind her was a simple slide, redesigning power from the inside. No photos, no brand partnerships, no high-budget intro video, just her, and silence that welcomed what she had to say. When people say power is taken, Seren began, they rarely ask who built the structure that made it so easy to take in the first place. Some in the room straightened their backs. Others reached for their phones, not to text, to take notes. Kyle wasn't there, but he saw clips of the speech later. It was trending. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't personal, but it was sharp, honest, the kind of language that echoed longer than headlines. That afternoon, Seren met with two women afterward, one from a minority design coalition, the other a startup founder. You said something I haven't stopped thinking about, one of them said. You said, quiet doesn't mean absence. It means listening until it's safe to speak. That hit hard, Seren nodded. It's something I had to learn the slow way. Meanwhile, Kyle sat in his office, watching a silent reel of the event on loop. He paused when Seren turned to the side, gesturing as she said something that wasn't audible in the clip. He knew that motion, the way she moved when she believed in her point. He used to see it in pitch meetings, used to point it out, even tease her for it. Now, he missed it. Not out of ego, out of truth. Vieira dropped by unannounced. She looked around his office and raised an eyebrow. Still mourning the one that got away, Kyle leaned back. No, just trying to understand the one I let slip through my fingers. Vieira scoffed. There's a difference? There is, he said. One is about fate, the other's about failure. Later that week, a charity gala was held by the New York Design Alliance. Kyle's company had donated to the foundation for years. He was invited, so was Seren. But this time, she wasn't attending as a guest. She was being honored. For leadership in structural equity and inclusive design, Kyle walked in alone. No Vieira, no security detail, no press stunt, just him. And the truth. When Seren stepped on stage, applause followed. A former board member introduced her as the woman who taught the rest of us that progress doesn't always have a microphone, but when it does, it doesn't ask for your comfort. Kyle clapped, but quietly, not out of pride, out of humility. After the event, they crossed paths near the exit. She wasn't cold. She wasn't overly warm. She was Seren, balanced. Congratulations, he said. She tilted her head. Thank you. He didn't try to explain himself, didn't beg for attention, didn't fill the space with words that lacked repair. He simply nodded and walked away. Seren left 30 minutes later, got into a rideshare, looked out the window as the city moved. Her phone buzzed. A text from Kenza. "You handled that beautifully. Proud of you." Another from the coalition rep. "Let's schedule that design lab for Q1. We're ready." And then, a text from an unknown number. "You said silence isn't absence. I hear you now, loud and clear." She didn't reply, but she didn't delete it either. In the quiet of her apartment, Seren sat down with a cup of tea. She thought about who she used to be, how easily she gave away her time, her softness, her silence, and how far she'd come. The past was no longer something to explain. It was something to stand on. Kyle sat at his desk in silence. The company was stable, profits high, projects moving, but the air felt heavy, not from stress, from awareness. He had built an empire, but at what cost? He leaned back, eyes closed, and let the questions settle like dust on polished glass. Vieira walked in without knocking. Again, she wore a silk blouse, expensive cologne, and a smug look that hadn't aged well. "You're quiet lately," she said, leaning on the doorway. "Listening more," Kyle replied. "To what?" "To what I never heard when it mattered." She folded her arms. "You've been acting strange since that gala." He looked at her, long and flat. "Strange is showing up for photo ops and missing the real conversations." She blinked. "Excuse me?" "Everything we built together was about appearances. The charity dinners, the articles, the features. Are you blaming me for—" "I'm blaming both of us," he interrupted, "for turning love into branding." Vieira stood there for a second, lips tight. Then she scoffed. "Whatever phase you're going through, I hope it doesn't tank the company." Kyle didn't answer, because it wasn't a phase. It was truth, finally catching up. That night, Kyle found an old folder buried in his archive drive. Studio 5, early concepts. Seren it was, from 6 years ago. Sketches, notes, building layouts, proposals they brainstormed during midnight pizza runs and weekend coffee spills. He scrolled through them slowly. Every page had her handwriting on the margins. What if this walkway wrapped around the atrium? Natural light here would reduce stress. Community input first. He paused. One note stood out. Beauty fades. Kindness echoes. Build with both. He closed his laptop and exhaled. The next morning he showed up at the Rise LHQ without warning. He didn't ask for a meeting. He waited in the lobby like everyone else. Seren walked out of the elevator, surprised. "I wasn't expecting—" "I won't take long," Kyle said. "Just a few minutes." She hesitated, then gestured toward a side room. A simple, glass-walled conference room with no art, no ego. Just seats and space. They sat. She waited. He spoke. "I won't ask to rewrite the past," he began, "but I will ask to take responsibility." Seren didn't move, didn't rescue the silence. Kyle continued. "I mocked your grace, made your softness feel like a weakness, replaced your loyalty with distraction. Still, she said nothing. Vieira was a mirror. She reflected who I was pretending to be. And who are you now?" Seren asked finally. Kyle paused. "Someone learning how to earn silence instead of buying noise." Seren studied him. "I don't need an apology," she said. "I know, but I'll take the truth." Kyle nodded, then stood. Before leaving, he placed an envelope on the table. It wasn't money. It wasn't a check. Inside were the original design drafts of the Rise L building she once envisioned, still unbuilt. He had archived them all this time. At the bottom, a note. "You saw the future. I was too arrogant to build it. Here's the blueprint if you ever want it again, on your terms." Seren looked down at it. She didn't cry, didn't flinch, but something in her eyes shifted. Not forgiveness, not closure, just peace. 3 weeks later, Seren stood at a panel event with 3 other founders. They were discussing growth. One audience member asked, "What's the best revenge when someone underestimates you?" Seren smiled, calm, building without them, and doing it well enough they never question your silence again. Later that evening, as the city lights came alive outside her window, Seren received a message from Kyle Rowan. I withdrew my name from the board of Vieira's foundation. She didn't take it well, but I wasn't doing it for her. Thanks for the blueprint. It reminded me that integrity doesn't need an audience. She stared at the screen for a moment, then turned it off, because some victories didn't need a reply. They just needed to be lived. Seren didn't post about it. She didn't gloat, didn't whisper about Kyle's visit to friends or colleagues. She simply lived, in quiet grace, and her silence spoke volumes. Because when you have nothing to prove, even the loudest room can't drown you out. Weeks passed. Her days were full. Rise L opened its first youth mentorship wing. The press noticed, but Seren declined interviews. Every time a journalist asked for comment about her past with Kyle, she replied with the same sentence. This story isn't about what I lost. It's about what these young women are gaining. The dignity in that sentence sent ripples across social media. But Seren didn't check the likes. She was in classrooms, not comment sections. Kyle, meanwhile, returned to work like a different man. The changes weren't loud, but they were real. He stopped interrupting in board meetings. He started giving credit instead of claiming spotlight. He paid the interns better. He asked about their ideas. He even sat in on a sustainability proposal from a junior associate and implemented it. It didn't undo the past, but it shifted the present. Vieira, on the other hand, didn't adapt. She demanded more appearances, more exposure. She didn't notice when people started calling her cold, or when editors stopped inviting her to panels about women's empowerment. What she didn't understand was this: power without empathy doesn't grow. It calcifies. One afternoon, Kyle arrived home and found Vieira yelling at the housekeeper over a misplaced vase. I don't care what your day's been like, you work for me. She snapped. Kyle stepped in, quiet but firm. That's enough. Vieira turned. Excuse me. He faced the housekeeper first. You can take the rest of the day off. Full pay. Then he looked at Vieira. I don't want to share a house with cruelty. She laughed in disbelief. Are you joking? You used to say harsher things. I was wrong then. And I'm not staying wrong. That night, he slept in the guest room. By morning, Vieira was gone. She'd taken her things and left behind a note. You're not fun anymore. You've changed. Kyle read it twice, then tossed it in the fireplace, because some losses feel like air finally returning to your lungs. 2 months later, a quiet article appeared in a design journal. Studio 5 Design collaborates with Rise L for Women's Initiative Building. There was a small photo, Seren, smiling beside 3 young women in hard hats, reviewing blueprints. In the background, a familiar architectural style. Kyle's early sketches brought to life by Seren and her new team, with new names on the design. Not his. That building had no trace of him. And that's what made it right. That weekend, Kyle stood alone on the rooftop of his apartment. The city shimmered under evening light. He wasn't thinking about money or success. He was thinking about stillness. For the first time, it didn't scare him. Because peace, real peace, doesn't come when you get what you want. It comes when you stop needing to prove anything. His phone buzzed. A message from Seren. The girls voted to name the library after your mother. Said her story moved them. He didn't smile. He softened. Then replied, she would have been honored. Thank you. He didn't ask to see Seren again. He didn't ask to explain himself more. Because healing isn't always reunion. Sometimes, it's knowing you didn't waste your second chance, even if it came too late for love. It was a quiet Thursday when Seren walked into the new Rise L building for the first time. She didn't carry a speech. She didn't wear designer heels or call the press. She wore soft loafers and carried a folder of program schedules tucked under her arm. The team stood clapping, not because she asked for it, but because they knew what she built. Not from Kyle's name, from her silence. From her refusal to fight dirt with dirt, from choosing purpose over proof. Upstairs, the reading room had been painted in soft golds and creams. On one wall, a quote, "Power means nothing without compassion." It wasn't attributed to anyone, but Seren remembered exactly when she'd said it. After a long night, standing outside the courtroom, when a young woman had asked, "How do you stay calm when people try to tear you down?" That quote now lived on the wall where girls would read it daily, and choose differently. Across town, Kyle drove to a quiet cemetery. His mother's grave was simple, her name carved in stone. No flourish, no plaque, no fanfare. He laid fresh tulips on the grass. "I finally understand why you left when you did," he whispered. "You wanted me to see what pride was costing me." He stayed there for a long time, long enough for the air to still, long enough to feel small, in a healing way. When he returned home, his apartment felt unfamiliar, spacious, yet hollow. Success echoed louder in empty rooms. He sat at the edge of the bed and pulled out a small notebook, something his mother had gifted him when he graduated architecture school. He'd never used it. Not once. Tonight, he opened it and wrote 4 lines. "I mistook noise for legacy. I mistook applause for love. I mistook pride for protection. But silence taught me who I am." That notebook stayed on his nightstand. He never published it, never quoted it online. He simply kept writing in it, for himself. A few months later, Rizel hosted a panel on integrity in leadership. The host reached out to Kyle, not as an apology tour, not to market his new self, but because his recent actions had aligned with values they were now trying to teach. Kyle said yes, under one condition. He would not speak on stage. He would help fund 5 scholarships for young architects from low-income communities. No branding, no announcements, just action. Seren found out 2 weeks later, not from Kyle, but from a girl in the program. He never said it was from him, the girl had told her. "We only found out because his name was buried in the legal endowment paperwork." Seren blinked twice, smiled once, then turned back to help the girl fix her binder tabs, because real impact doesn't wait for applause. And so, their lives moved forward. Not intertwined, but not bitter either. Seren met someone new, slowly. He wasn't a billionaire. He didn't command rooms or arrive in limousines. But he listened. He laughed without sarcasm. He helped set up chairs for community events without needing to be thanked. And one evening, when Seren stumbled upon Kyle leaving an awards dinner, alone, she nodded politely across the parking lot. He nodded back. No words, no sadness, no longing. Just mutual recognition that some endings are meant to free you, not finish you. That night, Kyle stood on his balcony. He didn't wish to go back in time. He didn't crave Seren's love. He honored it. The version of himself she once believed in, he became that man. Not for her, but because she had the strength to walk away. Somewhere in the city, a girl opened the door to Rizel. She had tears in her eyes and $2 in her pocket. But she saw the gold paint, the warmth, the quote on the wall. And she whispered to herself, "Maybe I don't have to be loud to matter." And in that whisper, a legacy lived. Not Kyle's, not Vieira's, but Seren's. Quiet, unshakable, unbothered. True, let them mock you. Let them underestimate your silence. Let them build thrones out of noise and ego. Because in the end, what lasts isn't what's loudest. It's what's honest. Power without kindness crumbles. Love without respect fades. But dignity? Dignity echoes long after the spotlight moves on. If Seren's strength stayed with you, tell us in the comments what moment spoke to you most. Hit like if you believe real power doesn't need noise. Share this story with someone rebuilding in quiet. And subscribe to Mr. Charles Stories, where we believe silence isn't weakness, it's wisdom. We'll see you in the next one.